How 371,683 German POWs rejected Nazism in America. Let's start on June 14, 1943, at Norfolk Naval Shipyard, Virginia. A 22-year-old German corporal named Erich Schmidt steps off the USAT George Washington, his boots still crusted with sand from the deserts of El Alamein. In his fist, he's clutching a crumpled Nazi leaflet, ink-smudged, but he knows every word by heart. America is a decaying den of Jewish greed, starving, divided, and weak. 3 months earlier, he was fighting for Rommel's Afrika Korps, sleeping in foxholes, eating hardtack that tasted like chalk. Now, he's a prisoner, and what he's seeing doesn't line up with the story. Seagulls circle overhead, and a breeze blows in scents he'd almost forgotten, fresh-baked bread from a nearby bakery, burnt coffee from a dockworker's thermos, even vanilla from an ice cream cart by the gate. Back in Germany, 1943 meant scraping by on 1,200 calories a day if you were a civilian, less than half what a person needs to stay healthy. Erich hadn't tasted vanilla since his sister Liesel turned 10, in 1938, before the war, before ration cards, before the Gestapo took their neighbor Mr. Klein's bakery. Mr. Klein was Jewish, they sent him to a work camp, and he never came back. Then the noise hits, cars honking like geese, a train whistle cutting through the air, a loudspeaker blaring, Chattanooga choo-choo, so loud Erich can hum along. No air raid sirens. No one whispering about Allied bombers. No one ducking into doorways to hide. A guard in a khaki uniform nods toward the dock. Come on, fellas. Mess hall serving hot chow, eggs, bacon, even pancakes if you're quick. Erich froze. Hot chow. In Germany, even officers ate cold potatoes for breakfast. He glanced down at that crumpled leaflet again, then at the streetlights, blazing bright, no blackout curtains, and thought, this has to be a show. They're just putting on an act for us new prisoners. What Erich didn't know. He was one of 371,683 German POWs who'd undergo a transformation so big, it would rewrite Europe's future. This wasn't a show. It was the truth, and it would tear down everything the Nazi Party had taught him to believe. To get why what Erich saw next hit him so hard, we first need to talk about the lies he'd been told his whole life, lies the Nazi Party drilled into every soldier until they felt like facts. It wasn't just posters or radio speeches, it was woven into every part of their lives, training drills, letters home, even the rations they ate. Let's break those lies down, one by one. First lie, America is starving. Nazi newspapers like Völkischer Beobachter and radio stations like Reichssender Berlin painted America as a country falling apart. Goebbels himself told factory workers in 1942, their factories can't feed their people. New Yorkers riot for bread, Chicagoans scavenge garbage for meat, kids beg on street corners for scraps. But for Germans, the reality was far worse. By 1943, civilian food rations were down to 1,100 calories a day, below the World Health Organization's minimum for survival. Kids got rickets from no milk, adults traded family heirlooms, watches, jewelry, even wedding rings, for potatoes on the black market. Erich's mom wrote him in March 1943, "We haven't had eggs since Christmas. Your dad traded his grandfather's pocket watch for a loaf of bread last week. Liesel cried when she saw it go, she thought it was yours to have one day." The Nazis used that suffering to sell their lie, Americans have it worse. They printed fake photos of U.S. breadlines, actually from the Great Depression, a decade earlier, made up stories about food riots in Detroit, which never happened, and claimed American soldiers ate sawdust bread to survive. Truth is, U.S. troops got 2,800 calories a day, more than double what German civilians ate. Even Erich's basic training handbook, Der Feind, the enemy, said, American soldiers throw away half their rations because they're spoiled, but their people at home starve. This is democracy's weakness, it can't feed its own. Second lie, America is industrially weak. Hitler's generals told their troops America's Jewish-controlled factories couldn't keep up with Germany's Aryan efficiency. In 1943, the Wehrmacht sent a memo to every unit: the US makes 1,000 tanks a year, we make 4,700. Their bombers are flimsy, their steel is poor, their workers are lazy. They'll run out of materials by 1944. Erich heard this every day in North Africa. His sergeant, Hans Weber, an old vet from the Eastern Front, laughed around the campfire: Americans make good cars, for picnics. But their tanks? I saw one hit by a rifle grenade and fall apart. They'll never match our Tigers. And their factories? Run by Jews who care more about money than winning. But here's the truth they didn't tell him: by 1943, America was making 40% of the world's war gear, more than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. Germans had no way of knowing that. Their newspapers couldn't print Allied production numbers, and if a soldier listened to BBC radio, which told the truth, they faced execution for defeatism. Erich once asked a lieutenant why they never saw US bombers over Germany. The lieutenant said, "They can't fly that far. Their planes are too slow, fuel tanks too small. They're cowards, only attack weak targets." But by 1943, US B-17s were bombing Berlin regularly. The Nazi government just covered up the damage. Third lie: America is racially divided, and inferior. For the Nazis, America's segregation was a gift. Goebbels called it proof democracy fails. In a 1941 film, they say, all men are equal, but they lynch Negroes, segregate Jews, treat immigrants like dogs. Their freedom is a fraud, only Aryans build real civilizations. Nazi trainers went further. Erich had to take mandatory racial studies classes, where they taught that black Americans were subhuman, small brains, no reason; Jewish Americans were parasites, controlling banks and media; white Americans were too soft to fight, spoiled by luxury, afraid of hardship. We were told to shoot black soldiers on sight, Erich later remembered. Our sergeant said, "They're not prisoners, they're animals. Killing them is like putting down a dog." He even saw a fellow soldier shoot a black US private who surrendered in Tunisia. The soldier wasn't punished, he was praised for upholding Aryan honor. This lie wasn't just about hate, it was about making the Nazis look legitimate. If America's democracy was broken, then Hitler's master race idea seemed like the only fix. As Goebbels put it, if democracy's best is lynching its own people, our way is right. Fourth lie: American soldiers are cowards. Nazi propaganda painted US troops as spoiled boys who'd never endured hardship. A 1943 film showed actors playing GIs, crying over scratches, complaining about cold food, running from fake German attacks. The narrator said, they joined the army for free meals, a trip overseas. At the first shot, they dropped their guns and begged for mercy. Erich believed that. He'd fought tough British soldiers in North Africa, so he figured Americans would be weaker. When his unit surrendered to US troops in Tunisia, he thought, these guys look soft. Clean uniforms, new boots. Probably never slept in a foxhole in the rain. A US captain offered him a cigarette after surrendering. Erich refused, he thought it was a trick. The captain just shrugged and said, suit yourself, don't try anything stupid. Erich waited for the captain to shoot him if he turned around. He never did. By the time Erich stepped off that ship in Virginia, he'd spent years soaking up those lies. They weren't just ideas, they were how he survived. Doubting them meant doubting the war, the party, everything he'd fought for. Questioning them meant being called a traitor or defeatist, crimes punishable by death. But America was about to give him every reason to doubt. The first crack in those lies usually came within 48 hours. For Erich, it was the mess hall. For Walter Hallstein, a 32-year-old former law professor from Frankfurt, captured in Sicily, it was a Mississippi farm. For Karl Muller, a 28-year-old German mechanic, captured in Italy, it was a Ford factory in Michigan. For Heinz Becker, an 18-year-old farm kid from Bavaria, it was a camp library in Iowa. Let's follow each of them, because their stories all boil down to the same thing, the world they'd been told about, versus the world that actually existed. First, Erich's first taste of real food. Erich's first stop was Camp Blanding, Florida, one of 511 POW camps spread across America. By 1945, every state but Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont had one. The camp sat on 30,000 acres of pine forest, barracks painted olive green, a baseball field, even a small chapel. It had barbed wire around it, but inside? Nothing like the concentration camp he'd been told about. Barracks had cots with thick mattresses, not straw, showers with hot water, even in December, and a little store, called the PX, where prisoners could buy cigarettes, 25 cents a pack, chocolate, 10 cents a bar, toothpaste, 5 cents a tube, with money they earned from work. Pay was 80 cents a day for privates, $1.20 for sergeants, more than many German workers made in a week. But the real shock hit at breakfast the next morning. Erich lined up with 200 other prisoners in the mess hall. The air smelled like bacon and maple syrup. A cook in a white apron plopped scrambled eggs onto his metal plate, 2 whole eggs, not the powdered stuff he ate in North Africa, added 2 slices of crispy bacon, a stack of pancakes, and a glass of cold milk. Erich stared at that milk. It was pure white, not the watered-down gray slop he'd drunk in Germany. In Germany, kids under 6 got half a liter of milk a week, adults got none. He'd forgotten what real milk tasted like, creamy, sweet, with a hint of grass. "Is this a trick?" he asked the guy next to him, Dieter, a 19-year-old from Berlin who'd been captured in Normandy a week earlier. Dieter laughed, mouth full of pancake. "I thought the same thing yesterday. Waited for the guard to yell, 'Got you.' But he just handed me another syrup bottle. They serve this every morning. Even Sundays." Erich took a small sip. For a second, he was 10 again, sitting at his kitchen table in Hamburg, drinking his mom's milk before school. Then he remembered Liesel, 15 now, hadn't had milk in 2 years. She'd written, "I dream of milk sometimes. I pour it over bread and eat it slowly." That night, he wrote in his diary, "The Americans give prisoners milk. Cold, real milk. My sister is starving in Germany. What kind of decaying nation does that? I don't get it. Maybe the leaflets were wrong. Maybe everything was wrong." The lie was starting to fray. Now, Walter Holstein's lesson in efficiency. By August 1943, Walter was sent to Camp Como, Mississippi. His job? Picking cotton on a farm run by John Wilson, a 55-year-old World War I vet who'd lost his right leg at the Battle of the Argonne. John drove a red pickup to the camp every morning to grab Walter and 10 other prisoners. Walter was a scholar, not a farmer. He'd taught constitutional law at the University of Frankfurt until 1937, when the Nazis fired him for refusing to swear loyalty to Hitler. He hated the Nazis, he'd watched them arrest his Jewish colleagues, but he still believed in Aryan efficiency. Growing up, his dad, a small-town mayor, always said, "Americans make toys, but we Germans make real things, tractors, factories, armies." That belief died on his first day at the farm. John's farm was 500 acres, bigger than the whole village where Walter grew up. Rows of cotton stretched to the horizon, and in the distance, a bright green John Deere tractor sat under a shade tree. Walter stopped mid-row to stare. "You never seen one like that?" John asked, wiping sweat with a bandana. He leaned on his wooden cane, his prosthetic leg ached in the Mississippi heat. Walter shook his head. "In Germany, most farmers use horses. Tractors are for the army, we pull artillery with them, not plow fields." John laughed. "We got 4 million tractors in America, 1 for every 2 farms. This one plows 10 acres a day. My dad used a horse back in 1910, took him a week to do the same work. Wanna try it?" Walter nodded. John showed him how to start the engine, shift gears, adjust the plow. The tractor even had a radio, John turned it to a country station. Walter had never seen a radio in a tractor before. In Germany, only 1 in 5 families had a radio, and they were locked to Nazi stations. That afternoon, a storm rolled in. John invited the prisoners to his house to wait it out. His wife Mary baked chocolate chip cookies, Walter had never tasted chocolate chips, and served iced tea. Their 12-year-old daughter Sarah asked Walter to read her Charlotte's Web. He read slow, in English, and Sarah corrected his pronunciation. "Where does all this food come from?" Walter asked John, watching Sarah play with the family dog. John shrugged. "We grow it. America's got 2 billion acres of farmland, more than any country. We feed ourselves, and still send food to Britain and Russia. Last year, this farm grew 50,000 pounds of cotton and 10,000 pounds of corn. Could a German farmer do that?" Walter thought of the Nazi hunger plan, their plan to starve 30 million Slavs in Eastern Europe to make room for Germans. He thought of food lines in Frankfurt, empty grocery stores, kids begging for bread outside churches. He thought of Frau Schmidt, his neighbor, who starved to death in 1942. That night, he wrote, "The Nazis talk about Aryan efficiency. But this is efficiency, no fear, no slave labor, just machines and men working together. I'm ashamed. Ashamed of what my country's become, ashamed I ever thought we were superior." Next, Karl Muller's trip to a factory that broke all the rules. In September 1943, Karl was sent to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. His work detail: loading crates of engine parts at Ford's Willow Run plant, the biggest factory in the world then, covering 3.5 million square feet. They built B-24 Liberator bombers, 4-engine planes that could carry 8,000 pounds of bombs. Karl was a mechanic. He'd worked in a German tank factory before the war, so he knew machines. He'd helped build Tiger tanks, heavy, powerful, but slow to make, only 1,347 during the whole war. He'd been told America's flimsy bombers fell apart in combat. Willow Run proved that lie wrong. The factory was a mile long, with 42 assembly lines. Conveyor belts moved parts, wings, engines, landing gear, from one end to the other at 6 feet a minute. Workers, men and women, black and white, attached parts as they went. A neon sign hung from the ceiling, 1 beat 24 every 63 minutes. Karl stopped to watch a bomber come together. At 8 a.m., it was a pile of metal frames. By 9:03, workers had attached the wings. By 9:45, they'd put in the engines. At 9 hours 63 minutes, 1 hour and 3 minutes later, it rolled off the line, fully built, ready to fly. In Germany, he said to a U.S. worker named Mike, 28, from Brooklyn, "Our best bomber factory in Dessau makes 30 Ju-88s a month." Mike grinned, wiping oil from his hands. "We make 288 B-24s a month here. Last year, we built 18,400 total, more than Germany's made all war. And these things don't fall apart. My brother flies one over Berlin. He says it can take 20 bullet holes and still get home." Karl's jaw dropped. 18,400 bombers. Germany's entire air force had 5,000 planes, total. He thought of that Nazi memo he'd read in North Africa: America will run out of steel by 1944. But here, steel was everywhere, stacks 10 feet high, waiting to become bombers. Workers drank Coca-Cola on breaks, 5 cents a bottle. There was a diner in the factory serving hamburgers, 15 cents, and milkshakes, 20 cents. Mike invited Karl to lunch. They sat on a bench outside, and Mike pulled a sandwich from his lunchbox: roast beef, lettuce, tomato, on white bread. He offered Karl a bite. "This is more meat than I'd get in a week in Germany," Karl said. Mike nodded. "My mom packs me one every day. She says, feed the German, maybe he'll stop fighting." They laughed. That night, Karl wrote, "The Nazis lied. Not a little, completely. This factory makes more in a day than Germany makes in a month. How can we win this war? We can't. Not against this. Not against a country that feeds its workers roast beef sandwiches and builds bombers like toys. Finally, Heinz Becker's book that changed everything. Heinz was 18, fresh out of high school, when he was drafted into the Wehrmacht in 1942. He was a farm kid from Bavaria, raised on Nazi propaganda. We need more land for Germans, Lebensraum. The Slavs are weak, we'll take their farms. He believed it, until he was captured in Tunisia and sent to Camp Elgona, Iowa. Camp Elgona had a library with 5,000 books, something Heinz had never seen. In Germany, libraries were small, and most books were censored. Anything by Jewish authors, or anyone critical of Hitler, was burned in 1933. He wandered the shelves one afternoon and picked up a blue-covered book, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. He read it in a week. It's the story of the Jodes, American farmers who lose their home in the Great Depression and move to California for work. They're poor, hungry, discriminated against, but they help each other. Share food, defend each other, never give up. Heinz cried when he finished it. He thought of his family's 50-acre farm in Bavaria, worked by his parents and 3 siblings. He thought of Nazi lies about weak Americans. The Jodes weren't weak, they were tough. Kind. Nothing like the greedy Jews or lazy Negroes he'd been told about. He went back to the library and asked the librarian, Mrs. Henderson, a volunteer from town, to recommend more books. She gave him To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. He read about Atticus Finch, a lawyer who defends a black man falsely accused of a crime. Why would he do that? Heinz asked Mrs. Henderson. In Germany, a lawyer would never defend a Jew. Mrs. Henderson smiled. Because it's the right thing to do. Atticus says, you never really understand a person until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. That's what America's about, trying to do right, even when it's hard. Heinz thought of Mr. and Mrs. Cohen, the Jewish couple who'd run a small store in his village. The Nazis took them away in 1938. He'd never said anything. Never helped. That night, he wrote, I think I was wrong. About America. About Jews. About everything. The books here don't lie. They show real people, not the monsters the Nazis talked about. I want to be like Atticus. I want to do the right thing. For Erich, Walter, Karl, Heinz, for all 371,000 of these men, the shock wasn't just about food or machines. It was about humanity. The Americans weren't the monsters they'd been told about. They were farmers who shared cookies, workers who shared sandwiches, librarians who shared books, guards who handed out extra blankets when it got cold. The lie was collapsing. But collapsing isn't the same as changing. That came next. By late 1943, the POWs stopped asking, is this a trick, and started asking, why is this real? For most, the turning point was a small, human moment, something so ordinary, so opposite of what the Nazis taught, that it couldn't be ignored. A shared cigarette. A helping hand. A conversation that made them question everything. Take Erich's friendship with James. In November 1943, Erich was transferred to the Ford River Rouge plant in Detroit. They made trucks for the U.S. Army. He worked the night shift, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., assembling truck engines. His partner was James, a 32-year-old black foreman from Alabama who'd worked at Ford for 10 years. At first, Erich was terrified. The Nazis had told him black Americans were violent, stupid, unfit to work. He expected James to hate him, for being German, for fighting for a regime that called him subhuman. He avoided eye contact. Only spoke when James talked to him. James broke the silence on their third night working together. Your English is pretty good, he said, handing Erich a wrench. Where you from? Berlin, Erich mumbled, focusing on an engine bolt. My cousin lived in Berlin, before the war, James said. He was a musician. Played jazz in clubs. Ever heard of Joe Williams? Erich shook his head. He'd never met a black person before, except for that U.S. private his sergeant shot in Tunisia. James didn't push. He taught Erich how to tighten bolts right, not too hard. You'll strip the threads, laughed at Erich's bad jokes. Why did the chicken cross the road? Really, and shared his lunch when Erich forgot his peanut butter and jelly, my mom's recipe. One night, a storm knocked out the factory's power. They sat in the dark, waiting for the lights to come back. James pulled out a harmonica and played Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Erich listened, mesmerized. Why aren't you angry at me? Erich finally asked. I'm German. We're at war. My country thinks you're less than human. James paused, then put down the harmonica. I'm angry at Hitler. Not you. You're just a guy trying to get by, same as me. My dad fought in World War I. He said Germans weren't monsters then, either. Just guys like him. Erich thought of those Nazi leaflets, Negroes hate white men. They'll kill you if they get the chance. He thought of James, who'd shared his sandwich, played him music in the dark. He thought of that black private, just a guy, too. That afternoon, they talked about their families. James had a wife Lena, and 2 kids, Maya, 6, and TJ, 4. He showed Erich a photo, Maya holding a teddy bear, TJ grinning with cake all over his face. She wants to be a teacher, James said, pointing to Maya. TJ wants to be a pilot. I tell them they can be anything. Erich told James about Liesel, how she loved to read, wanted to be a nurse. He pulled out a crumpled photo of her from his wallet, 15, smiling, holding a book. You should write her, James said. Tell her about America. The factories, the food, the people. She'd like that. Erich did. In his next letter, he wrote, I work with a black man named James. He's kind. Teaches me to fix engines. He has a daughter your age who wants to be a teacher. The Nazis lied about them, too. They're not monsters. They're people. Just like us. His mom wrote back a month later. Her handwriting was shaky, like she was crying, don't say that. The Gestapo reads letters, they'll hurt us. But, the neighbor's son Dieter, who's in America, wrote the same thing. About black workers. He said they shared lunch with him. I don't know what to believe anymore. I miss you. Erich knew. The lie about race was dead. Then there's Walter's Camp University. Walter hated sitting around doing nothing. So in Camp Como, he started a little group, prisoners who met every night in the recreation hall to talk about books, politics, history. At first, only 10 people came, mostly former teachers and students who'd secretly read banned books in Germany. By 1944, it was 200. The U.S. Army had a secret program called the Sunflower Project, started in 1942 to fight Nazi ideology. When they heard about Walter's group, they didn't shut it down, like the Nazis would have. They sent books, copies of the U.S. Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, Common Sense by Thomas Paine, Histories of American Democracy. One night, Walter read a passage from the Declaration aloud. The room was so quiet, you could hear crickets outside. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. A prisoner named Hans, once a Nazi Party member, a former school principal from Nuremberg, laughed. He slammed his fist on the table. This is garbage. Hans yelled. All men aren't equal. Aryans are smarter, stronger, better than Jews, Negroes, Americans. This is just Jewish propaganda, to weaken us. The room exploded. Some prisoners yelled in agreement, others argued back. Walter waited for the noise to die down, then spoke. Tell that to James, he said, calm. The black foreman I met in Mississippi. He makes $2.50 an hour, more than my dad, who's a doctor in Germany. Tell that to Mary, the farmer's wife who fed me apple pie. She's American, and kinder than any Nazi I've ever met. Are they unequal? Weaker? Hans didn't answer. He stared at his hands, like he was seeing them for the first time. Another prisoner, Lies, a former teacher from Hamburg, spoke up. In Germany, we have equality, but only for Aryans. Jews can't go to school. Negroes can't live in our neighborhoods. Here, they're not perfect. There's segregation. But they're trying to fix it. That's the difference. The Nazis don't fix anything, they just kill people who are different. That night, Hans stayed late. He walked up to Walter, head down. Can I borrow a copy of the Constitution? He asked. I want to read it. Really read it. Walter handed it to him. Take your time. We can talk about it next week. 2 weeks later, Hans came to the meeting with the Constitution, dog-eared, filled with notes. I read it, he said, quiet. The part about checks and balances, it makes sense. Hitler has all the power. No one can stop him. That's why we're losing. That's why we're bombing our own people. In America, if the president messes up, Congress stops him. The courts stop him. That's not weakness. That's strength. Walter smiled. The lie about democracy was dead. And then there's Karl's friend Dieter getting sick. In January 1944, Dieter, the 19-year-old from Berlin, got pneumonia. In Germany, pneumonia was a death sentence. Hospitals had no antibiotics, penicillin wasn't available to German civilians until 1945, no beds, most were for soldiers, no heat, fuel was for the war. Karl's own grandma died of pneumonia in 1941, she was 68, and the hospital turned her away because she wasn't useful to the war effort. Karl expected Dieter to be stuck in a cold infirmary, given a thin blanket, left to die. That's what would have happened in Germany. Instead, the camp nurse, Margaret, an older woman who'd been a nurse in World War I, moved Dieter to a private room in the infirmary. She put a heater next to his bed, coal, which was scarce in Germany but plenty here, gave him penicillin, a drug Karl had never heard of, checked his temperature every hour, and brought him hot chicken noodle soup, made with real chicken. Karl visited every day after work. One afternoon, he walked in and saw Margaret sitting by Dieter's bed, reading Winnie the Pooh to him. Why are you doing this? Karl asked. He was confused, even angry. This wasn't what he'd been told. Americans were supposed to be cruel. He's a German prisoner. You're an American nurse. Why not let him die? Margaret looked up. Her eyes were soft, but her voice was firm. Because he's a kid. 19 years old. He didn't start this war. He didn't choose to fight for Hitler. No one deserves to die alone, especially not a kid who's scared. She paused, then added, my son died in North Africa. He was 20. A German soldier shot him. I could hate all Germans. But I don't. I hate the war. I hate Hitler. But not kids like Dieter. Not you. Karl thought of Nazi propaganda, Americans torture prisoners. Let them die of disease. Enjoy our suffering. He thought of Margaret, sitting with Dieter like he was her own son. He thought of his grandma, left to die in a cold house. Dieter got better in 2 weeks. When he left the infirmary, he gave Margaret a drawing, of a flower, with, thank you, in English. Margaret cried when she saw it. That night, Karl wrote, the Americans are kind. Kinder than we are. The Nazis lied about everything. About America, race, democracy, cruelty. I don't know who I am anymore. Don't know what to believe. But I know I don't want to be a Nazi. Not anymore. Here's a number that says it all: only 0.6% of German POWs in America tried to escape. That's 2,230 men out of 371,683. For comparison, 2% of Italian POWs escaped, 5% of Japanese POWs. Why so low? Because escaping meant going back to Germany, a country being bombed every night, where food was scarce, where the Gestapo arrested anyone who even talked about the war being lost. Erich was once asked by a new prisoner, Fritz, 20, from Munich, why no one tried to run. They were standing in the camp's baseball field, watching prisoners and guards play a game. Why don't we escape? Fritz whispered. We could run into the woods. Steal a car. Go to Mexico. Anything's better than being a prisoner. Erich shrugged, kicking dirt. Where would we go? Back to Germany, where my sister's starving and my mom's scared of the Gestapo. To Mexico, where we don't speak the language and we'd get arrested as spies. Or stay here, where I get 3 meals a day, a bed, a job that pays real money, and a chance to see my family again. Fritz didn't ask again. For these men, America wasn't a prison. It was a lifeline. And they were starting to realize, the life they wanted, food, freedom, safety, a future for their families, was the life America offered. Not the life the Nazis promised. By 1944, the war was turning. D-Day happened in June, Allied troops landed in Normandy, pushing Germans back. Paris was liberated in August. The Allies invaded Germany in September. For the POWs, every news report was a punch to the gut: their country was losing, their families were in danger, but also proof, the Nazi Party's lies had led Germany to destruction. Their transformation kicked into high gear. They didn't just doubt the Nazis anymore, they rejected them. Publicly. Boldly. Tore up their party cards. Argued with Nazi loyalists in the camps. Wrote letters home telling the truth about America, even though it was dangerous. Take Walter writing to his dad. Walter's dad, Otto, was a high-ranking Nazi, worked in the Ministry of Propaganda, helped write Goebbels' speeches. Walter hadn't spoken to him since 1937, when he refused to join the party. Their last conversation ended with Otto yelling, "You're a traitor to your country. I never want to see you again." In October 1944, Walter wrote him a 10-page letter. He wrote in small, neat handwriting, wanted his dad to read every word. Told him about the Mississippi farm, John and Mary and Sarah. Told him about the Camp University, the prisoners debating democracy until midnight. Told him about James, the black foreman making more than a German doctor. Told him about the B-24s, the milk, the nurse who saved Dieter. Then he wrote. "You were wrong, father. The Nazis are wrong. America isn't weak, it's strong. Not because of weapons, but because of freedom. People here work hard because they want to, not because they're afraid. They help each other because it's the right thing to do, not because the party tells them to. I saw a black man and a white man working together in a factory, laughing, sharing lunch, helping each other. In Germany, that's a crime. Here, it's normal. I read the Constitution. It says, all men are created equal. The Nazis say that's a lie. But I've seen it. I've lived it. I'll never support the Nazis again. When I come home, I'll fight for democracy. Help rebuild Germany, not as a Nazi country, but as a free one. Even if it costs me my life. Even if it means you never speak to me again. I miss you, father. But I miss the man you used to be, before Hitler. Before the lies. I hope you find that man again. Before it's too late. Asterisk. He mailed it, knowing the Gestapo would read it. Expected his dad to disown him. To send a letter back calling him a traitor. To never speak to him again. 3 months later, in January 1945, he got a reply. The envelope was worn, like it had been opened and resealed, it had, the Gestapo's stamp was on the back. His dad's handwriting was shaky, nothing like the bold script Walter remembered. My dear Walter. I have seen the bombs. I have seen the hunger. I have seen bodies in the streets of Berlin. I know we are wrong. I know Hitler is a monster. I am sorry. So sorry for what I did. For what I said. For not protecting you. I can't leave the ministry, not yet. But I'm helping. Passing information to the resistance. Hiding Jewish families in my basement. It's not enough. But it's something. Come home. We need to fix this. Together. I love you. Father. Asterisk. Walter cried when he read it. Cried for the dad he'd lost, for the country dying, for the hope they could fix it. The lie had died, even for a Nazi official. Then there's Erich tearing up his party card. Erich joined the Nazi Party in 1941, when he was 20. He didn't believe in the ideology, joined because it meant better rations, an extra slice of bread a day, a better uniform, new, not hand-me-down, a chance to be promoted to corporal. I joined to survive, he later said. Not because I believed in Hitler. But he kept his party card. It was a safety net, proof of loyalty, in case he was accused of defeatism. He carried it in his wallet, next to Liesel's photo. In November 1944, he found it in his suitcase. He was packing to move to a new camp in Indiana, and pulled out the yellowed paper, his photo, younger, thinner, his signature, the Nazi Party seal. He stared at it for a long time. Thought of James, sharing his peanut butter sandwich. Of Mary, baking cookies. Of Liesel, starving in Germany. Of the Cohens, taken away by the Gestapo. Of that black private his sergeant shot. Of all the lies, about America, race, democracy, cruelty. He tore the card into tiny pieces. Over and over, until it was confetti. Flushed it down the toilet. That night, he wrote, I am not a Nazi. I never was. I'm just Erich. A son. A brother. A man who wants to go home. A man who wants a better life, for me, for my sister, for Germany. I'll never carry that card again. Never believe those lies again. And Karl making a promise. Karl started a democracy group at Camp Kilmer. They met every Sunday afternoon in the recreation hall, 20 men sitting on folding chairs, talking about how to rebuild Germany after the war. Talked about free elections, Germany hadn't had those since 1933, equal rights for all Germans, including Jews, disarming the military, so Germany could never start another war. A U.S. guard named Tom joined their meetings. Tom was 25, from Boston, a D-Day vet. He'd lost his brother Mike in Normandy, killed by a German sniper. Why are you helping us? Karl asked him one Sunday. My country killed your brother. You should hate us. Tom shook his head. He wore a bracelet with Mike's name on it. I hate the Nazis. Not you. My brother would have hated the Nazis, too. He was a teacher, loved kids, loved books, hated bullies. Hitler was a bully. The Nazis are bullies. I'm helping you because I don't want my brother to die for nothing. Germany needs to be a democracy. Then we won't have to fight again. Then no one else's brother has to die. Karl nodded. Thought of his own brother Hans, fighting on the Eastern Front. He hadn't heard from Hans in 6 months, didn't know if he was alive or dead. I promise you, Karl said. When I go home, I'll work for democracy. Tell everyone about America, the good parts, not the lies. Help rebuild Germany. We'll be allies, not enemies. Your brother's death won't be for nothing. Tom shook his hand. I'll hold you to that. In 1945, the war ended. Germany surrendered on May 8, VE Day. Japan surrendered on August 15, VJ Day. For the 371,683 German POWs in America, it was time to go home. The U.S. Army shipped them back in groups, 10,000 a week, from ports in New York, Boston, Norfolk. They weren't the same men who'd arrived in 1943. They weren't Nazis. They were believers, in democracy, in freedom, in the power of abundance over hatred. They carried more than suitcases, they carried ideas, equality, cooperation, how a country should treat its people. Their legacy started the second they stepped off the ships in Hamburg, Bremen, Bremerhaven. Take Walter Hallstein, for example. Walter went back to Germany in February 1946. Found his dad Otto in Frankfurt, living in a small apartment, his propaganda ministry uniform hidden in a closet. Otto had been helping U.S. occupation forces find Nazi war criminals, giving them names, addresses, even hidden documents. "I'm sorry," Otto said, hugging Walter for the first time in 9 years. "I'm so sorry." Together, they started Democrats for Germany, a group pushing for free elections, equal rights, denazification. Walter traveled across West Germany. East Germany was controlled by the Soviets, who didn't allow democratic groups, giving speeches about his time in America. Talked about the Mississippi farm, the Constitution, all men are created equal. In 1949, West Germany held its first democratic elections. Walter was elected to parliament, part of the Christian Democratic Union. He became a key advisor to Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, helping write West Germany's new constitution, the Basic Law, which guaranteed free speech, free religion, equal rights for everyone. In 1957, Walter was named the first president of the European Economic Community, the EEC, which later became the European Union. The EEC's goal was to unite Europe economically, so countries couldn't go to war with each other. Walter's vision: if we trade with each other, we won't fight with each other. He met President Eisenhower in Washington in 1955. Eisenhower was Supreme Allied Commander in Europe during the war, helped plan D-Day. "You're the reason we won the peace," Eisenhower said, shaking Walter's hand. "Not bombs, people like you. People who saw a better way and fought for it." Walter smiled. "No, Mr. President. America is the reason. You showed us a better way. Gave us hope." Walter served as EEC president until 1967. He died in 1982, but his legacy lives on. The EU, now 27 countries strong, owes a lot of its start to his vision. His memoir, America Changed My Mind, is still read in German schools. Then there's Erich Schmidt. Erich went back to his Bavarian village in March 1946. His sister Liesel was alive, thin, but healthy. She'd been working as a nurse's aide in Munich, helping wounded soldiers. His mom Anna had died of starvation in January 1945, she'd given her last ration card to Liesel. Erich cried at his mom's grave. Liesel handed him a stack of letters, all the ones he'd sent from America, which she'd hidden from the Gestapo. "I read them every night," she said. "They gave me hope. Knew you'd come home." Erich opened a small machine shop in the village. Fixed tractors, cars, farm tools. Business was slow at first, most people had no money, but he worked hard. He hired David Cohen, a Jewish mechanic who'd survived Dachau. David's family was killed in the Holocaust, he had no one else. "He's a good mechanic," Erich told the villagers. "And a good man. If you don't want to work with him, you don't want to work with me." In 1947, neo-Nazis showed up at the shop. They wore brown shirts, illegal under U.S. occupation, but they didn't care, and swastika armbands. Their leader, Klaus, a former SS officer, said, "You're hiring Jews? You're a traitor to Germany. Join us, or we'll burn your shop down." Erich stood in front of David. He wasn't tall, but he was strong, from years in factories. "Get out of my shop," he said. "I spent 2 years in America. Saw what freedom looks like. Saw what hatred does. You want to burn something? Burn your swastikas. Burn your lies. But get out, and never come back. The neo-Nazis threatened him, but left. Erich called the U.S. occupation forces, who arrested the group the next day. Erich told his neighbors about America, the food, the democracy, the kindness. Helped start a local, Democrats for Germany, chapter, voted in every election. Married Heidi, a teacher from Munich, and had 2 kids, Michael and Sarah, named after John and Mary's daughter in Mississippi. In 1995, at 74, Erich wrote a memoir called The Milk That Changed My Life. In it, he said, America didn't just capture my body. It captured my mind. And that's how it won the war that really mattered, the war against hatred. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who learned the truth. And lucky enough to live to tell it. Karl Muller's story is just as powerful. Karl went back to his family's farm in East Germany in April 1946. But East Germany was controlled by the Soviets, no free elections, no free speech, no abundance. The Soviets took half the farm's crops for war reparations, arrested anyone who criticized the government. Karl didn't like it. Remembered America, the tractors, the freedom, being able to say what he thought without getting arrested. In 1948, he escaped to West Germany with his wife Elsa and their 1-year-old son Peter. Crossed the border at night, hiding in a hay cart. They bought a small farm in Baden-Württemberg, 50 acres, red barn, white house. Karl used what he learned in Mississippi, about tractors, irrigation, hard work, to make the farm successful. Bought a John Deere tractor, just like John Wilson's, and hung a photo of John and Mary in his barn. He had 3 more kids, Anna in 1950, Thomas in 1952, Lisa in 1955. Every night, he told them stories about America, the Ford factory, James the foreman, Tom the guard. Taught them to value freedom, respect everyone, never believe lies. America isn't perfect, he'd say. But it tries to be better. That's what we need to do, try to be better. His son Klaus, named after his brother Hans, who died on the Eastern Front, grew up to be a diplomat. Worked at the German embassy in Washington, often meeting U.S. officials to talk about German-American relations. In 2000, Klaus met President Clinton at the White House. They talked about their country's history, enemies in World War II, allies in the Cold War. My father was a POW in America, Klaus said. He came home a believer in democracy. Taught me enemies can become allies. That's why I'm here, to keep that alliance strong. Clinton smiled. Your father's story is America's story. We don't just fight wars, we win peace. One person at a time. Tell your father I said thank you. For everything. Klaus did. Karl cried when he heard it. I just did what was right, he said. That's all anyone can do. And Heinz Becker, the farm kid who loved books. Heinz went back to Bavaria in May 1946. Went to college, studied education, became a high school history teacher. Taught his students about World War II, not the Nazi version, the truth. Told them about the Holocaust, the Nazi lies, his time in America. Every year, he read To Kill a Mockingbird to his class. Atticus Finch is my hero, he'd say. He did the right thing, even when it was hard. That's what we need to do, stand up for what's right, even when everyone else is sitting down. He invited Holocaust survivors to speak to his class. Took students to concentration camps, Dachau, Auschwitz, to show them what hatred does. Started a tolerance club at school, where kids talked about racism, anti-Semitism, how to stop it. In 1990, when East and West Germany reunited, Heinz was 66. Retired from teaching, but kept speaking to schools and community groups about his time in America. I was a kid when I went to America, he said. Believed everything the Nazis told me. But America showed me the truth. Showed me people are more alike than different. That's the lesson we need to remember, now more than ever. Here's the thing most people don't learn about World War II, the biggest win wasn't just D-Day or the Battle of the Bulge. It was the win that happened in prison camps, over coffee, over milk, over conversations that changed how 371,683 men saw the world. This win was different. It wasn't one with guns. It was one with kindness. With abundance. With truth. The Nazi Party tried to build an empire on hate and lies. Told their people America was weak, democracy was a failure, some people were subhuman. But 371,683 German prisoners saw the truth. Saw a country that fed its prisoners milk, let black and white people work together, valued freedom over fear. These things didn't just change those men. They changed Europe. Changed the world. Erich Schmidt's grandson Michael runs a business in Berlin that trades with American companies. He has a photo of Erich and James the foreman on his desk. Walter Hallstein's name is on the EU's founding treaty, a reminder enemies can become allies. Karl Muller's great-granddaughter Emma is a teacher who tells her students about the American miracle that changed her family. Heinz Becker's students, now grandparents themselves, tell their kids about the teacher who taught them to stand up for what's right. This is the legacy of that forgotten victory: hate can be defeated. Enemies can become allies. And the smallest acts of kindness, a glass of milk, a shared meal, a conversation, a book, can change the course of history. So next time you hear about World War II, don't just think of battles. Think of Erich, standing in a mess hall, staring at a glass of milk. Think of Walter, reading the Declaration of Independence to a room full of prisoners. Think of Karl, promising a guard he'd rebuild Germany as a democracy. Think of Heinz, reading To Kill a Mockingbird and realizing he'd been wrong. Think of the 371,683 men who saw a better way, and brought it home. And remember, the greatest weapon isn't a bomb. It's a vision of a better life. A vision of a world where people are kind to each other, where freedom matters, where lies don't win. And that vision? No lie can ever destroy it. Thanks for listening. Let's keep that vision alive.